right, and nice job, Lori. Thank you. Gosh, Lori, thanks for your patience.
Thank you.
Me in particular.
I wish I was more articulate than I was.
Hey, what, Lori? I missed it. What did you say?
Oh, I'm thinking of the times I wish I had not stumbled over my words, but it's, it's normal.
Yeah. I don't think it sounded like a good concentrated conversation to me. I didn't hear any or notice any stumbling, and I don't think the viewers will either. So it was good.
Fun.
Yeah, Rex, what did you think?
What came up for you, Rex?
That was really good. It was enlightening. Just to kind of hear some of that stuff that some of it I've kind of suspected. Like there's certain people I follow like that are in their 60s, like celebrities who have recently gotten divorced. And I'm like, why would you get divorced after 30 years? But yeah, you were saying how some people just wait for their kids to get older and then they're already burned out and they're just giving up. I've heard this, and I wonder if you would, I don't know if so much confirm it, but say, yeah, that's pretty much true, is that women grieve divorce before the divorce and men grieve after the divorce. Would you say that's true?
That's interesting. That's really interesting because I have not heard it articulated that way, and I would say, yes, it is. And I don't know if that's because, again, more women initiate divorce. But when I've had couples divorce and I'm still working on grieving, it is usually the husbands I'm still working with after the fact. And women have made that decision. And so, again, I don't know if it's exactly related to that, but yeah, I haven't articulated that way. And I would say, yes, that fits my clinical experience.
That's interesting. And you had mentioned that so women are more likely, generally speaking, to initiate the divorce. And you were saying you've seen an uptick in, I don't know if that behavior particularly, but at least in gray divorce since about 2008 because of the advent of Facebook and social media and the internet, correct?
Well, maybe. Clinically, I have. I don't know if the research verifies that, but yes, clinically, I have.
Now, you mentioned this word, and I know you guys discussed it a little bit, but I wanted a little more understanding of it. Attachment injury. Can you give like an example of attachment injury?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So an attachment injury is defined by a really distinct rupture in the marriage. And one of the defining characteristics is that suddenly your partner feels like a stranger. You're not sure who this person is. So you thought you knew who your partner was, and it's generally related to some kind of major deception. So it could be financial deception. It could be, affairs are obvious ones, right? But any kind of hiding a habit, hiding an addiction of some kind. And so suddenly it just really throws the partner off because it's a sense of, I don't know who you are. And so it disrupts this connection fundamentally, because how do I connect to what I don't know?
Mm-hmm. And you said that a lot of people will do, because of an attachment injury, will have a constraint commitment, right?
Yes. So what I mean by that is they don't want to get close. So they'll maintain distance in the marriage. And, we have a lot of research on how maybe conflict isn't the worst thing. In many ways, distance is more dangerous than conflict. I remember being told that in 1989 in my very first marriage and family therapy class, and it's turned out to be true. And so, oh gosh, I just got lost in what I was saying, Rex.
You were saying how distance is the more damaging part of a marriage, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I was saying that in those injuries, a lot of times it just feels easier to people to not process them because they bring up emotions and they might get into arguments. So instead, what they do is they avoid talking about those things and they preserve this distance, which we know from research in many ways is more dangerous than conflict.
Wow. I've heard this too with children. Neglect is worse than abuse. So that's kind of a similar thing, right?
Yeah, because neglect, and this is the same in romantic relationships, right? If you can't even get your partner to react to you, it's like, I don't even matter enough to you to get you to respond. It's a very alarming feeling. And
Wow.
so interestingly, people will be trying to decrease conflict, preserve the marriage by keeping the conflict low, and not realize they're actually amping up their partner's sense of danger.
That is fascinating. Now, when you speak of distance, I would suppose you mean emotional distance. Even though the person's there emotionally, they're
Yes,
not connected.
yeah. And also reflected physically, right? In physical affection. That's kind of a litmus test. But yes, definitely emotional distance. People often report that they're just living like single people, like roommates.
Oh,
Many of them have different bedrooms.
oh,
That's not an uncommon thing I hear at all.
and what do when people get to that point, is there one of them that's like, hey, what's going on? And like, how do they, when they're in that point where they're not in the same rooms, they're not sleeping in the same beds, they're emotionally distant, but they're still kind of roommates or maybe a business partnership, so to say, what leads them to therapy? Is there anything, friends, something they hear, or is there one partner that, hey, like this is just not working for me anymore? Like, what happens?
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, it's often their last ditch effort. So it's sort of, this is the last thing we're going to do before divorce. That's generally not what you're hoping for with your clientele, but that does show up a lot of the time. And so it's sort of the last check mark on we did what we could to save the marriage. Because again, the person who's been driving that often kind of becomes burned out. And there are occasions in which that burned out or the withdrawing partner will actually get more engaged and suddenly they recognize the urgency. And so they will become more active, and that might help sometimes. But fortunately, there are a lot of times where it's too late. The other person has already just given up.
So you were mentioned, like, this is all about gray divorce, and a lot of people it sounds like a lot of people will wait till their youngest child reaches the age of 18 or 21 before they're just like, all right, I'm out. I'm gone. I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong or explain this better to me or our audience, is that a divorce is damaging to a family regardless of how young or old your children are and everybody else that's involved. Is that true?
Yes. And I will say that I've often had adult children come in tears and with a lot of anxiety because they realize I'm not going to be able to take my kids to their grandparents' home, right? They're going to be different grandparents' homes. And it actually has a deep emotional impact on people. It's highly distressing.
I would imagine for the people involved, it's just like you lose a sense of identity too, because you're like, which home is home now? Who is, where do I go? You have this identity that was connected to this unit, and now that's fractured, and it doesn't matter how young or old you are, it still is traumatic.
Yeah, there's a lot of grieving that's necessary there, and then adapting to different households and maybe new family members, because parents sometimes remarry, right? That's a whole other set of episodes.
Yeah. How would you recommend people avoid, like, I know the internet seems like a very easy tool. The social media seems like an easier way to connect with old flames and things like that. Is there any advice you can offer to people, like, don't do it, or something, concentrate on something else, or anything you've offered your clients in the past?
Yes. It's interesting because I can still remember I was on a hike once with this other couple, my husband and I were, and they asked me, what's the one thing you would tell people to preserve their marriages? And my first response was, oh, there's so many. It's so multivariate. And then I said, okay, wait, I'm up to the challenge. Actually, the one thing I would say is to recognize that when you're texting somebody or you're on social media, it's as if you're in a room without doors or windows, without anybody else watching you. And so you're more like, there's no boundaries. So you're more likely to disclose and create an emotional connection. And then the second part of that is the minute you have to hide that communication from your spouse, you've reached the tipping point. You're in dangerous ground.
Something I do is I don't friend old relationship people, and I don't friend my friends' wives or things like that. I just all connections are people I know directly and I don't go indirectly. That's one thing that I do.
That makes a lot of sense because there aren't natural boundaries. So you absolutely have to create boundaries because there are none.
We can get so curious.
Yeah,
we can get so curious about an old love, can't we? It's like, I wonder what happened to so and so.
Of course.
And curiosity killed a lot more than the cat. That's what I say to that.
That's right.
Well, in Nancy Kalish's research I was talking about, she found that people got more depressed when they sought out old love interests. They actually experienced higher depression because of the feelings that it brought up. And it was unexpected. They weren't expecting it to bring up these bad feelings. It brings up some of these energized feelings, but it also brought up some depressed feelings. It's just fascinating.
I would think, and I've heard Dave say this a lot. I love this quote, is that comparison is a thief of joy. And I would imagine that when people contact those older relationships or people they were interested in, they just start comparing everything. And then it just sends them into depression.
Yeah. And there's no way to not idealize that, right? That's just what you're going to do. You and everybody else. That's just what you're going to do.
Yeah.
You're going to remember all the parts of that.
This has really been an awesome conversation. And I like what you said earlier, that empathy, and I agree with this. Empathy really is, I think, the key to keeping a marriage strong or a relationship strong, period. Is there any advice or tools or I don't know how things you can tell people to practice becoming more empathetic or ways to do that?
I think it's getting curious and having, I would say, a not knowing stance, because as humans, we tend to see patterns and we anticipate and we think we already know when we don't. And if you can sort of get yourself into a space of, gosh, maybe there are things to learn about my spouse or about their experience here that I don't know, and you're genuine about it, and you can ask, what was that like for you? What was the hardest part of that? I think it's actually quite effective. I wouldn't say it's natural because we tend to just rely on what we think we know already. But when people do engage in those exercises, it makes a big difference.
That's amazing advice. I've really appreciated this conversation.
Me
so
too.
Thank you for sharing all that.
Me too, Lori.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very
All right,
good.
I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off here unless anybody else has anything else to ask.
No, thanks, Lori.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a few minutes to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. When you hit the like button and leave a comment, your feedback helps us improve the show. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and connect with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and on Facebook at Stronger Marriage. Be sure to share with us what topics you want us to explore or what you loved about today's episode. If you want even more resources to improve your relationship connection, visit our website at strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producers Rex Polanis and Alexis Alcott and the team at Utah State University. And you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission